France in the 17th century was a controlling force over women, taking away their rights. A significant figure from that time was Francois Poullain de la Barre. He was one of the most outspoken women's rights activists from that time. He was born in Paris, 1648, and his most important works were On the Equality of the Two Sexes, The Education of Ladies, and The Excellence of Men. These three books are known as the most detailed analyses of the subjugation of women in the 17th century. Despite Poullain's Cartesian beliefs, he became an ordained Catholic priest in 1679. But this was short-lived as he left the church in 1688. After that, he moved to Geneva, where he lived until he passed in 1723. Poullain was an extremely controversial figure since his ideas were very abnormal for the time. Because of this, he didn't have much of a global impact. He was most influential in 17th century France and early 18th century Geneva.
During the 17th and 18th centuries, the mentality of asking about the origin and the reason of things involving social, political, and economic norms expanded. This period was called the Enlightenment, a time in which the writer, priest, and defender of gender equality, Francois Poullain de la Barre, lived. In this period, social classes and social status could put a destiny in your daily life, and even more so considering your gender. During this time, although women had the freedom to meet in social clubs, most of women who attended these clubs were considered of a high social status, which allowed them to have just a bit more of advantage than women with a lower status. Adding that these reunions and talks were not completely supported by men, and even less when discussing ideals such as gender equality, marriage, and politics. Throughout the Enlightenment, the economy was carried out by the authorities, who did not take into account the economic status of women. Among other things, many countries suffered economic chaos during the Enlightenment era due to many conflicts. Enlightenment brought the development of free trade, something that had a great impact on the economy of countries that were in decay. Focusing on the political and economic relationship, there are many points that cover the role of women. To begin with, during this period of time, women did not have the right to keep properties in their name, since this could only be done by a man, something that limited the rights to divorce, which was not even an option. Women did not have rights like men had. They were even prohibited from staying in some places such as schools, or anything to do with learning at the time. Women were silenced in every way possible, and their economic status was not respected. It was definitely not taken into account by those who had power. Most of them, if not all, were men. In our opinion, we believe that although Francois Poullain de la Barre had an education based on ideals that put men on pedestals and denigrated women until reaching a point where they were thought of as monsters and inferior to men, since it was something that was taught and learned by students who were basically taught to hate women. Men learned to hate women, and we think that the writer wanted to get to the root of all this hatred for women, asking himself, why did they hate women so much? He believed that there was no reason in itself, since it was just something that they read and learned from historical figures such as Aristotle and other theologians who were studied at the time, which make us suppose that he grew up curious to know why.
This was the life of de la Barre, until one day he encounters a strange and eerie-looking door, and he opens it. It was a time machine, but when he realized that, it was already too late. He was locked inside. When the door finally opened, he was greeted with a totally new world. He saw some weird rectangles on everyone's hands, and he encountered an extremely bright rectangle on the ground. And as he got closer to it, he realized it was text, and it read, "Educational Disparities Among Girls in India," an article written by Jenna Cook in 2020. He had traveled over 300 years, and it said,
in this article, it is stated that Indian women have only a 66% literacy rate, compared to men with over a 82% literacy rate. Since 2011, men have always been at least 20% higher in literacy than women. Factors that cause this difference are mainly child labor due to economic crisis, child and arranged marriage that restrict the liberty from the teenagers, because mostly of the girls of India are married before turning 18, and cultural stigmas like menstruation and the lack of information about it. Females that bleed and don't have the necessary products, or females that experience cramps with no medication, which can cause pain. This causes a visible bleeding that shames the girls and most of the times obligates them to stay at home.
when seeing the news, he couldn't help but question how, after more than 300 years of him speaking his mind and promoting equality of sexes, society never stopped discriminating against women and violating their autonomies and human dignity. We think that he would feel extremely frustrated and disappointed that entire cultures from highly populated countries all around the world that have had hundreds of years to make positive changes based on the ideas he preached during his lifetime, such a large part of the world still has those same ideas as they did in his time. It aggravates his temper to see the same ignorance that he experienced and the same rejection to change from the 17th and 18th centuries that sees them as only having the role of getting married and taking care of children. We think that he would feel ashamed and unheard. He may have thought that the effort he did in his time did not make a difference and the world was as unjust as it was in his time.